Well, I've been asked to say a few words, kind of in a memorial for Kerrie. How many of you made the funeral? Did any of you, I opened it to everybody. I see a few hands out there. Well, this may be a little bit of a repeat what I talked about then. One of the things I did was I explained to people how I met Kerrie. It was back in, I said 1986, it was 1987, it was fall of 87. I was out with some friends at dinner one night, and this place had a club next door to it, and we walked in, and I happened to run into a friend of mine who's also passed away just recently, and he was introducing me to some friends of his that were there, and one of them happened to be Kerrie. And so he and I are both being Irish kids. He looked at her, he said, or looked at me, he says, "What part of Ireland do you think she's from?" And I said, "Well, let's see, green eyes, red hair, fair skin." I looked at her real close and I said, "She's not Irish." And he goes, "What?" And I said, "She's not Irish." And he goes, "Well, how do you know?" And I said, "She doesn't have Irish eyes." And he goes, "Well, that doesn't mean anything to me." I said, "Well, no, it does." I said, he didn't understand that since I was a little kid, I've always been a kind of a cultural person. I've always looked at people, listened to people from different cultures, picked out features about them and things like that. So I looked at her and she stared at me and I said, do you have anybody in your family from Russia?" And she goes, "Well, yeah, my grandparents on both sides of my family are from Russia." And she kind of stared at me for a minute and I said, "Are you Jewish?" And her jaw hit the ground and she goes, "How do you know this?" And I said to my friend, I said, a couple things about her. I said, first off, I said, the corners of her eyes turned down a little bit. They're slightly Persian, kind of like Bette Midler. And I said, also, when I lived in the Chicago area, I knew a lot of Russian Jews, and most of the women had red hair and green eyes. So I had a little head start on her as far as that goes. Anyway, long story short, I left that night, went off with my friends. About a week later, I was at another restaurant, and we were sitting in the club, and now it sounds like I sit in a lot of clubs. No, I was the guy that drank Diet Coke and was a designated driver. I had the caffeine high at midnight, and was usually taking people home. And we were talking about going up in the mountains, excuse me, talking about going up in the mountains for Oktoberfest. I'd rented a cabin up there. And as we're talking about it, in pops this woman, and she walks up to my table, and I said, "Well, fancy meeting you here." It was Kerrie. And I said, "This is not someplace you usually frequent. What brings you here?" And she looked me right in the eye, and she goes, "You." Well, of course, my jaw hit the floor at that point. And so I grabbed her chair. I said, here's what we got going. It's going to be in a couple of weeks. I said, "You're more than welcome to come up, hang out with us that weekend." So that weekend came. We were all kind of settling into our different rooms in the cabin, and she and her sister and a friend of hers showed up. Excuse me, I've been fighting a head cold for like 3 weeks now. And we spent the evening sitting around this fireplace talking. She was knitting. And finally she looked at me and she goes, "Does this make you nervous?" And I said, "No, my mom taught me how to knit years ago when I was a kid. By the way, your stitches are a little loose." So that started us off right. Anyway, everybody went home the next day. Evidently, her sister gave her the high sign that I was a good guy to date, because that was why her sister came along. And not needless to say, I think it was about 2 weeks later, we went out on our first date. And I think it was Ming Gardens. I think it was Chinese that night. So we go on our date, we get to know each other, play get to know you. And I took her back home. At that time, she had Melissa and RJ, and they were at the babysitter. She lived in an apartment, and they were in the babysitter across from her apartment. So we got the kids, carried them in, they were asleep, put them to bed, and I said, "Well, it's been a great evening, I'll talk to you again." And I started to walk out the door. And she looks at me, and she goes, "Aren't you going to kiss me?" And I kind of looked shocked at her, and I said, "Well, I'm not really a kiss on the first date kind of guy." And she goes, "Well, all right." And I said, "Well, all right." So we embraced, and we kissed. And I took a step back, she took a step back, and she goes, "Well, that answers my question." And I said, "What's that?" "Well, it's not like kissing your brother." So, anyway, and it just so happened her brother was at the funeral when I told this story, and he started getting a chuckle out of it. But Kerrie was always searching for God. She spent her whole life, as she told me, looking for God. And somewhere around 2002, she must have run into him, because that's when I saw the big change in her. And she began to let God lead her life. And somewhere around 2004, she became sick. She had a throat condition. She couldn't even talk, and she would choke a lot on food and things. And we had her looked at doctors. They couldn't tell her what was going on. Nothing, you know, the gastroenterologist didn't know what was going on. ENTs. So basically, she just laid in bed for like about 10 months, and she couldn't talk. And the whole time she's laying in bed, and she can't talk, she's listening to God. And she said this is how she began to understand what God was trying to say is, be silent and listen, for I am God. And she began to listen to him, and she learned how to silence herself and listen to what he had to say. And that's what a lot of her books are about. Her books are about what God's been telling her. Kerrie was a person that could go out on the patio. In about 30 minutes, she'd be writing dictation furiously, just writing and writing and writing and writing, because God was dictating to her. And a lot of times that's the way her sermons came to her. And if you've ever seen any of her sermons, or if you've been here coming regularly, or if you've even watched them on YouTube, she has an interesting perspective on Christianity that I grew up in the church. I've been in it since I was a little tyke and sang in the choir and everything, and thought I knew the Bible pretty well. But she had some slants on it that I had to stand back and think, I got nothing. I can't argue with you. That's an interesting slant, and I've never really thought of it that way. And so if you watch the YouTubes, you'll hear her say some things, and you'll think to yourself, well, I've never been taught that before. And there are a lot of things that you aren't taught. There are some things pastors don't want to tell you. They're afraid that you're going to, I'm not sure what they're afraid of. I really don't know. I think they're afraid of chasing off their flock by telling them the truth. Okay? Well, the truth sets us free. It doesn't scare us off. If you're a true Christian, it sets you free. It doesn't scare you off. So, jumping back a little bit, she and I were married on July 16th of 1988. And I was thinking, as I looked at the crowd at the funeral, there were a lot of nieces and nephews that were married, and some young people that were married, and there were some people in their middle ages that I knew that were married. And I remember saying, I didn't remember saying it. Things were going off the top of my head because I was asked at the last minute by the pastor to say something at the eulogy. And I remember looking at him and I said, when you get married, you're getting into a contract. You don't think it's a contract, but it really is. It's a contract. And the reason you say the words is because in the old days, nobody knew how to read or write, so they would say them, and then, so help me God. And in this contract, there are 3 things that are expected of us, okay? The first one is to have and hold. And that kind of goes along with Matthew 19. When a man is to leave his mother and father, cleave to his wife, they become one flesh, and that one flesh shall never be torn apart. That part, to have and hold, means no one else comes into your life. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen a lot of times. Right now we've got over 50% divorce rates. And believe it or not, it's in the churches. I just had a friend of mine's sister call me the other day and said, you need to call Mark and talk to him, this friend of mine. I've known him since we were in kindergarten. I said, why? He goes, well, his wife just left him for another guy in their church. And I thought, you left him for another guy in their church. So divorce has come a long way. It's creeped into the church pretty heavy. So to have and to hold is kind of a hurdle these days to get over. So yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's my grandkids. Yay. Thanks, Zachary. Thanks, Brody. So anyway, if you can get past that hurdle, then you have another hurdle. It's called for richer or for poorer. Well, there's the other one that gets a lot of divorce rates. Some people just don't want to gut it out together, and they go their separate ways. The Bible does say we're not to get into debt. It's in the Old Testament. It doesn't need to be repeated. And there was a reason for it. God knew that if we got in debt, we were going to be slaves to that debt, because that's what he says. If you get in debt, you're going to be a slave to it. And if you become a slave to it, your eyes are not on God anymore. They're on that debt. If you remember, not so long ago, back in the early 2000s, we were all doing fine financially, a lot of us. We were doing great. And the churches were filling up with people, and the coffers were getting full in church. And then somewhere around 2000, 2007, 2008, the economy just bottomed out. And the churches started getting empty, and the churches' coffers were getting empty. Why? Because people were going into debt. They bought houses beyond their means. They bought cars beyond their means. They bought a life beyond their means. And so, again, the divorce rate jumped up again, along with reclosures and everything else. But if you can get through that one, if you can get through the first one, and you can get past the second one, to having to hold, for richer or for poorer, then you got the one that really is tough. Because now you've proved your love if you've got through the first two. Now what tests your love is in sickness and in health. And that's what I had to deal with for the last year. And it tests your strength, and it just tests you. Because now you've got a person here that can't take care of themselves, and you've got to take care of them. And you love that person enough that you're going to stay with them 24/7 and take care of them. And that's literally what I did for the last year. I walked away from my office and stayed home. And it was interesting because at the funeral, over half my office was at the funeral. There was about 12 people from my office that showed up that supported me the whole time that I was stayed home with Kerrie. But to sit there and watch somebody die in your arms is something you don't think about when you hear in sickness and in health. You don't think about it. But that's what we did. We prayed over her. I had friends of mine who were pastors come by and pray over her. Narcissus come over and helped us pray over her. I mean, we've all prayed over her. And we asked for whatever God's will was. And what God's will was, he wanted Kerrie back. Kerrie spent many years on this stage and at home fighting with the devil. The devil was her personal enemy. She loved God. God was first. Her family was second, and her friends were third. She had her priorities correct. Okay? That's the way it should be in any family. God is first, your family is second, and your friends are third. If you've got those priorities crossed up, you've got a problem. Okay? And Kerrie had her priorities right. Yeah, amen. That's right. And so, as I tell people, they say, "Well, you must be really upset." I am upset. As you can see, I'm still kind of teary-eyed right now because I do miss my partner. But you know what? I'm rejoicing for the woman that loved God because I know where she's at. And I know where I'm going to see her again. And so she's in a better place right now. She got her reward first. She got there early. And I mean, I can tell you the second when she passed away, because I was right there to decide, that when she was hugging on Jesus. I mean, you know, she was gone from here, but she was in heaven at that moment. And so, yes, I'm sad. I do miss her. She was a great partner. She always kept me on my toes. Oh, boy, did she keep me on my toes. But, because she was like Lucy. You never knew what she was going to do next, you know? But in the same point, I'm happy for her because she's got her reward. She's collected it, and she's hugging Jesus, and she's talking to the saints, and she's getting to do something we all hope we get to do someday. So with this, there's another scripture, and that is Jesus said, "Let the dead bury the dead." Kerrie's gone. We can't do anything for her. We can't even pray for her anymore. But we can take care of each other here. And I'm going to tell you something. This is what Kerrie would do. If there's anybody out here tonight that doesn't have a relationship with God, that doesn't have a relationship with Jesus, you're missing out. You're really, really missing out. Because that is the one glue that has kept a lot of families together. And it's the one glue that kept our family together. And my kids are here. My son Shay has been doing this for 9 years. He's been down over here running this concession stand for 9 years. He's thank you, Shay. Melissa has been with us almost as long, helping us out when she can. But she's got her hands full with 4 kids, so I don't blame her once in a while taking a break. And just keep this in prayer, because we got to make a lot of decisions on whether we're going to keep this going. One of the things that made this really volatile was because Kerrie did speak, and Kerrie spoke what God was telling her. And there are people in this town, there are pastors in this town that don't like what she had to say because it attacked them. Her whole thing in life was the dead in the pews. A lot of churches have a lot of people just taking up space. And those were the people that she was aiming for. And I think the one talk that scared her the most, because she asked me several times, should I not do it, was, and it's on YouTube, it was the things Satan doesn't want you to know. And it was pretty pointed, pretty straightforward, and shot from the hip. And I said, if God's telling you to teach it and preach it, you've got to teach it and preach it. So don't hold back. That's about it. And I want to thank you for 9 years of this. I know Kerrie was here. She would thank you too. That's just the way she was. She just loved everybody. And she loved this program. This was her highlight for the year, was getting this done. She had other things she did, but Praising in the Park was her highlight. She looked forward to this. And we thank you very much. And we will probably be doing this again next year. The kids and I have talked, and if we can work it around, we'll probably continue this on until we can't continue it on, or until the Lord comes back. So the hardest part is getting someone that can come out here and just beat on everybody. No, I'm just kidding. We don't beat on people, but we do preach to them. I know I had a long talk with the pastor just this last week. I said, why is it we're preaching to our 401(c) and we're not preaching our Bibles? And he looked at me very strange, and I said, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I said, you guys have watered down your sermons. You've watered down your ministries because you've let the government beat you into the ground. So now you're preaching to this, your 501(c), because that's your tax, that's your nonprofit status, and the government has threatened you to take it away from you if you preach like you're supposed to.
True.
Kerrie and I got rid of ours several years ago. We had a conflict down here at the park one night, and they said something about going after our 501. And I said, have at it, because we don't have one anymore. And we got rid of it.
Amen.
Because you're not going to tell us what we can and cannot preach.
Amen. Amen.
Absolutely. Amen. Absolutely.
Amen.
So we're going to try to continue that too. We're going to try to put people up here that maybe it's a little controversial about churches. I don't know if you guys read a lot of different social media. I have a Facebook account because my son threw me on there about 6 years ago. He says, everybody's got one, Dad. But I do keep in contact with a lot of my friends who are Christians, and there's a lot of really sourness with the church today. There are people who just want to attend church. They would rather sit at home and do church at home, or go to somebody's house and do church at somebody's house, than to go into a building anymore.
That's right.
Because the churches have corrupted themselves. This is the other thing Kerrie preached about. You'll see several on YouTube about how the churches have just come to corruption. And that's where we're at. And that's what we're going to try to continue to preach down here is, we want to get away from the corruption. This is kind of the church of old, actually, right here. This is how the church started right here. It was people getting together and worshiping and praising and edifying God in small groups like this. And this is the way it should be. I'm not a super church fan. I'm just not a super, I never have been. You know, how Joel Osteen can stand there and preach and then know who that guy is up in row UU, seat 39, section D, I don't know. How he can get with him personally and know him personally, I'll never figure it out. But that's why I don't like super churches, because we need to know each other personally in order to help each other, because we're here to help each other. And that's what God has us doing. That's what we're supposed to be doing. If we have any ministry whatsoever, we're to be lifting each other up and supporting each other. So that's where we're at. And that's what we're going to try to continue to do in this podcast. We're going to try to continue lifting everyone up, continue putting you on the right way and on the straight path. And giving you some good praise and worship music to come down and send under the stars. And this is actually a very nice night. It's a little cooler than normal. And look at our mountains and thank God for everything we got right here. All right? All right. And I really thank you so much for all you've done for us and for all that you did for Kerrie. And God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know, the band needs a little bit of a break, I think. I mean, I don't think they're ready to jump back in. Why don't you get up and all talk to each other? You know, a lot of you have been coming here for years. You probably don't even know each other. So get up and walk around, shake some hands. Got the governor over here. Come over here and shake his hand. and be friendly. That's the other thing we're supposed to be, is be friendly.